What's up, YouTube? I have another free TV from my recycler. Freebie! Alright, so this video is going to be about my experience fixing a 60-inch LG plasma TV. Like I said in the beginning, I got this for free from a recycler right down the street. It actually cost him more to recycle the TV, so he would just rather give them away. So I stopped down there randomly to pick up, well, the biggest TVs I can find. Obviously, there's going to be something wrong with pretty much every TV that I do get from him. That doesn't really bother me because I always have this urge, the urge to fix things. Now, having said that, I am not a TV repairman of any kind, anything. I'm an aircraft mechanic. Now that that's out of the way, some of this video I'm gonna have the back of the TV off and I'm gonna be checking voltages and whatnot with the TV plugged in. So if you are doing something like this, just be super careful because there is high voltage and you could seriously damage yourself. So just be careful. If you do something wrong, it's not my fault, I guess. I think I'm supposed to say something like that. Alright, well, let's get into it. Alright, so the TV I picked up was an LG plasma TV. The model number is 60PZ550. So it is a little bit older, but it was a 60-inch TV, so I had to pick it up. Obviously, the first thing I'm gonna do is plug it in and turn it on and see if anything shows up on the screen, and nothing shows up on the screen. I have no sound, I have nothing. About 30 seconds later, the TV will automatically shut off. But occasionally after it shut off, I would turn it back on and it would stay on. And since nothing was on the screen and I couldn't hear any sound, I had no clue what was going on with the TV. And as soon as the TV shuts off, the first thing I'm going to do is take out all the screws on the back of the TV and remove the panel. It seems like all plasma TVs have a bunch of circuit boards. The first thing I typically do is start with the power supply board, and I always look at the capacitors first because it seems like those always play a big role in every TV failure. So I'm looking for swollen capacitors or exploded capacitors. And I'm also looking for dark spots on the circuit board. Maybe something got hot or burned. Just a quick visual. The main board I just take a quick look at because I typically don't see much wrong with these just because all the components are usually super tiny. Same with this control board. I usually don't notice too much on these. Next thing I do is grab my multimeter and I put it on the ohm setting, basically the one that has sound, because the next thing I'm going to do is check all the fuses. First one I typically start with is the power supply board. This one has 3 fuses on it, and these fuses tend to lie sometimes, so I'll hold the probes on there for a good couple of seconds. And later on I'll show you why. The next fuse I check is on the Y sustain board, and then I move over to the Z sustain board. And this is where the fuses can be a little tricky. When I first stick the probes on there, I do get the continuity sound, and then the sound goes away. So I check it again just to make sure, and I have no continuity, so this fuse is bad. Next thing I'm going to check is voltages at all the terminals right here on the plug. Plug the TV in and turn it on, and I do have 5 volts. I move up to number 5 and I get 52.6 volts. 3 and 4 are ground. Number 2, I get 201 volts. And number 1, I get 201 volts also. So I am getting good voltage there, so I'm going to unplug it and I'm going to start checking for shorts. And as you can see, the other end I found is shorted to ground. So the next thing I'm going to be looking at is all the Mosfets underneath these aluminum heat sinks right here. Just from past experience working on other TVs or other electronics, these things do tend to short out and go right to ground. So this is what I'm going to be checking next. And there is a whole bunch of them. How I normally check for this is I'll stick one probe to ground and then I'll stick the other probe on each little tiny terminal on there, and if it makes the sound, it's typically shorted to ground. Now I will say not all of these are going to be shorted to ground, but since a lot of them are in parallel, if one is bad and shorted to ground, it can show the other ones being bad as well. And when I move down to these lower ones, it seems like every single one of them is shorted. And then there's one more smaller heatsink on the far right side of the board. The first 3 I check, the middle pin is actually a ground. They are going to make continuity, but this first one up here is shorted to ground. And And then the 3 that are a little bit lower, all 3 of these were also shorted to ground. So the next logical step is to remove the board. So the first thing I do is remove the ribbon cables. So of course make sure you are careful with these because they are pretty fragile. Make sure you are just a little bit careful trying to separate this board. If you just kind of wiggle the board back and forth, it will come out pretty easily. And another way to check all the MOSFETs once you have the board off is put one in on ground and check all the MOSFET solder joints. And if you look right here, 3 of the MOSFETs probably have gotten really hot and darkened the circuit board. Another thing you want to do is look for broken or cold solder joints. And if you look right here, these coils, the solder joints have worked themselves loose. If your TV has a lot of buzzing noise, these are usually the problem. Alright, so the next thing I did is I typed in the Z sustain board model number plus repair kit right on Google. First couple of options that showed up were on eBay. So I just went straight to eBay, found one that had the most parts in it pretty much, and ordered it. It was only 20 bucks, and I'll leave that link down below. And if you need to check out some MOSFETs, put your multimeter to diode check. And as you can see here, we have a forward voltage of 0.47 volts. That's pretty common on something like this. Now the other MOSFET, if you try to check it this exact same way, it does not work. And that's why I was using the continuity check earlier to see if they were bad. Alright, so now I'm going to attempt to replace all these. First thing I'm going to do is remove all the screws, and I figured these were going to be the easiest ones first. Once I have it flipped over, a couple of the solder connections are underneath the pad, and let me tell you, these pads are a pain in the ass to get up. If you use your finger, you're going to tear it up. So what I ended up doing was finding a popsicle stick and cut it at an angle, and then kind of use it as a little scraper to peel it up, and then just taped it out of the way. And one thing I've noticed about other circuit boards, to remove something like this, I actually find it best to add a little bit of new solder. And of course the tape didn't hold. Alright, so I'm going to be using the solder sucker. Basically heat up the solder and hit the little button and it will suck the solder right out. Now some circuit boards like these don't like to get rid of all the solder. So later on when trying to remove the MOSFETs, sometimes you are going to have to use the soldering iron to kind of liquefy the solder just to get the MOSFET out. And here I'm attempting to get the MOSFET out, but the damn thing would not come out because I didn't have anything to hold the circuit board. I'm trying to finagle everything and it is just not working. So I ended up just grabbing my small vise and throwing a rag inside and making my own helping hands. And as you can see, I'm having a little trouble getting these out with a pair of pliers. So I ended up just cutting off the little tabs that were sticking out, and that made it a little bit easier getting the MOSFET out. One thing that's great about these repair kits is they put a little label on there to let you know exactly where everything goes. Next thing I'm going to do is bend all the pins to match the holes as best as I can. And this is what I came up with. Once I had all the pins bent, I did shorten them up a little bit just to make them go into the upper side of the circuit board just a little bit easier. And of course the tape still didn't hold, so I just had to add more tape. And these MOSFETs also had some thermal compound. I didn't have any of the regular white kind. The only kind I did have was the Arctic Silver. And I'll put a link for that down below also. And once I got the MOSFET in there, I put the screw in just to hold it in place. After the first one, I just repeated the same thing for the next two. And for the last one, here's a close-up view just to show you exactly what I was doing. And I also ended up using that same popsicle stick just to push it down a little bit further because I was afraid I was going to break it with something else. After all three were installed, I just laid the circuit board down and soldered all the legs. The solder I'm using here is a rosin core. It's made by Kester and it's called Kester 44. The size is 0.8 millimeters or 31 thousandths. And this is a 60-40 electronic solder. And I'll also throw a link for that down below as well. And here's just a close-up shot of the 3 that I did. Now I didn't record removing all the MOSFETs. Here's just another shot of soldering the lower side. These 4 right here were actually a little bit easier to get in, so I didn't even have to cut the legs off. And since I left the legs long, I typically will add a little bit extra solder and then move the soldering gun up the leg just a little bit. It kind of gives it that nice point. And once you're done soldering, just trim the legs off. And I forgot to mention earlier that once you're done soldering, you should wipe it or scrub it down with some rubbing alcohol just to get rid of any extra flux. The next thing I ended up doing was resoldering all the broken solder joints. After soldering this first pin, I decided to clean off the other pins with some alcohol first, and that seemed to help out with the solder flow a lot better. Even though the solder I am using is a rosin core, I decided to add just a little extra flux with this flux pen, and it seemed to help out. And of course, I'll leave a link for that pen down below. The next thing I decided to do was change the fuse, and for this all I did was heat up the solder joint in the back side and pulled the fuse directly out. For the new fuse, I just bent the legs into the old shape, and since I didn't use the solder sucker on this, I just heat up the back side with a soldering iron and insert the fuse. And once the legs are through, just solder them up. Now the next thing I attempted to do was change one of the little tiny IC chips. Now I will admit I'm not very good at removing these small circuits, but the basic idea is to heat the pins up hot enough until the solder becomes liquid and then remove the IC chip. It did feel like it was taking way too long for this to happen. I'm guessing it was the solder that they used on the board. Once I got it removed, I cleaned everything with alcohol, added some flux, and then attempted to reinstall it. Now the same thing when you reinstall it, the basic idea is to heat up the legs and the solder joint until the solder is liquid. The IC tends to kind of float around a little bit, so I ended up just using the tweezers to hold it down. Once I was done, I checked continuity from the leg to the next solder joint just to make sure there was a complete connection through the leg and the solder joint. And like I said before, I am not very good at using one of these. This one felt like it was getting too hot and the board started to smoke. So I just called it quits and left the other 3 on the board. Alright, here's just a quick shot of all the MOSFETs installed. The fuse installed. And here's the 6 legs that I ended up resoldering, and these have coils on the other side. Next, I'm just going to make sure nothing is shorted to ground, and this whole section of the circuit board is ground, so one leg of these 3 MOSFETs right here are ground. Turns out all the MOSFETs are good to go. And if you want to check the other MOSFETs the correct way, this is how you do it. And you might as well make sure the fuse isn't shorted to ground as well. Alright, seems that everything is good to go. We're going to go ahead and reinstall the circuit board, and make sure you are just a little bit careful putting it in. Now I am using a drill to put these screws back in, but I do have it on one of the lowest torque settings. After that, I take a screwdriver and manually check to make sure every single screw is tight on this board and all the other boards. The grounding system on plasma TVs and other TVs is a pretty critical part, so make sure you check every single screw. I've actually repaired many TVs this way, and the only problem was a loose screw. Alright, I'm going to plug it in and turn it on. I'm going to do the first shot back here, just in case something blows up, we can catch it on camera. So far so good. Hey, look at that, we got something to show up on the screen. And of course, since I don't pay for cable TV and I had a makeshift antenna in the basement, it didn't quite pick up any channel. So I'm just going to plug in the laptop and play another TV repair video for you. How about that? Boom! Alright, so if you guys liked the video or it did end up helping you save your TV, make sure you give me a big thumbs up. Alright, there you go. It ended up being a $20 repair kit. Another TV saved from the landfill. And it was free. If you can find something wrong with a specific board, you can typically go right on Google and type the model number for that board and then repair kit. And most times it's typically right at the top. It's either on eBay, Amazon, or Shop Jimmy. Shop Jimmy did have pretty much the exact same kit, but it came with a few less transistors, or MOSFETs, and it was around 21 bucks. I went with the one on eBay because it came with more transistors because I wasn't exactly sure how many were bad. And I also forgot to say that I didn't end up changing any of the little tiny resistors that came with it because I did check every single one for the correct resistance and all of them were good. So I just didn't change those either. This wasn't a super hard repair, but it wasn't super easy either. It just took a lot of patience. Like I said before, I'm not some TV repair person. I do this because I just have an urge to fix things. I like the challenge and it's just what I do. I fix things. I don't always fix things. I blow stuff up too. And again, I'll leave a link to everything I used in the video in the description box down below. Okay, well I think that's it. So if you guys did like the video or it did help save your TV from going to the landfill and making the wife mad for buying a new TV, make sure you give me a big thumbs up and I'll see you on the next one. LC, it's not even LC, and flip the solder board, and make sure you give me a big thumbs up. Horace is up here now. A link. What was that? What was that? Yeah. What do you say, buddy? And again, like I said before, I'll leave a... Okay, just give me one more minute, okay? Yeah, it's like 3:20 a.m. I need to go to bed. Actually, I need to feed the stray cats outside first. And scare off a possum and a raccoon, probably. What do you say? Should we go do that? Alright, let's go do that.